Hello, everybody. Sorry about that. I don't understand why sometimes computers work and sometimes they don't, but thanks for waiting. If you're out there, send us a message here in Boileau. It is beautiful again. It's 22 degrees. It's gorgeous. It's hazy though. That those fires from the west and everywhere are really causing a damper on our environment. But anyway, the Canadian geese have been migrating south. So that's how we know it's time to say goodbye to all the friends that have been here. And yeah, so it's a little sad, but when they fly by, they wave. So it's quite okay. Anyway, sorry again, I was late. It's been dry, it's been warm. Man, we haven't had any rain. It's been unseasonably hot. We still haven't gotten our first freeze, which is now 6 days later than normal and more than 3 weeks what we usually get. But we've just escaped it. They're saying tonight, maybe, so maybe. Well, that's going to pull into tonight's show or this afternoon show when we talk about gleaning. But anyway, I'm going to continue on for a minute. So the importance of our gardens as spaces for wildlife cannot be overemphasized. They can be an extension of the wilds as the birds, amphibians, reptiles, little mammals, they all kind of go in and out from the cultivated areas to the wild areas. So when we're planting our gardens, we should really consider all of this. We should think about how we can invite these creatures and these friends in. I mean, especially as well as the bees and the butterflies and the hoverflies and everybody that we require to pollinate and all the insect community. We should really consider all of this. And we really want to make sure that wildlife doesn't really see a distinction between the two as much as possible. Now, we do have a fence, so obviously that keeps out the deer and the bigger mammals, but the birds and the butterflies, they don't really have so much of a problem going in and out through the holes, over the top. That doesn't matter to them. But it's something that we should think about because we don't really want our gardens to be separated. You can drive through these monoculture farms or even these large scale farms and you just see these barriers. You just see like where it's been tilled up completely and there's really nothing to bring these wild plants in. It's something that we should consider. Something we should always consider when we're thinking about our gardens. All right, so let's talk about it all. Keeping the gardens covered, leaving as much plant life as possible, and gleaning before the last frost. So I've broken this down into 3 discussion topics. Number 1, all plant material is food for the microscopic life, which is the living soil. As we know, soil is not dirt. It is actually billions of microorganisms and yards of fungi or mycorrhizae working together, creating and moving nutrients to where they are needed. The soil warms as microorganisms get active, moving, eating. This we can see with vibrant, active growth in spring and summer, right? But it is also happening now as the temperatures drop and the nights get longer. But they are not the same microorganisms over the seasons. They change. The more drastic the temperature extremes, the more change occurs. So you can look at it. You can look at it as when you look at the floral community in your gardens, right? In the spring, when it's lush growth, you have all the wild flora that's just pulsating everywhere. The dandelions are coming up, the clover's coming up, the wild strawberries are coming up, purslane's coming up. And this is all the microorganisms feeding those plants so that they can have a head start. Now, these are the plants that go to seeds first, right? Well, in the summertime, some of those plants shift over to other kinds of wild plants, right? Maybe you have other kinds of clover in your fields. Maybe you have yarrow. Maybe you have rudbeckia. These things then require different nutrients, right? As it goes into the fall, now we start seeing even a lot less growth. We're seeing the growth just kind of stagnate a little bit because here this time of year, it doesn't grow as fast. It doesn't mean that it's not still working. It's just it's different microorganisms. They're making different nutrients. Now, this is not something that would be very easy to study. it may be possible to study it from garden to garden, to field, from floral situation to floral situation, right? So this brings me up to a very interesting point. I was forwarded an email the other day by a friend who told me that big pharma, like Bayer, Syngenta, are getting into the business of producing genetically modified biologicals or genetically modified microorganisms. This is their answer to the idea that we need to regenerate soil. So what these geniuses have come up with is they believe that they found the solution for creating organisms to create a living soil, right? I think they're trying to patent 600 or so different microorganisms, and you can buy these. And I guess in organic agriculture, and I didn't really realize this, you can already buy this now. There's already a way to bring in like biological inputs into your soil, which is basically living tiny beings that you put into your soil that supposedly help make the soil more nutrient dense, nutrient rich. Okay. Well, this is what I know. What I know is that what my soil is doing here is definitely not the same as the soils as it would be in September, on September 26th in northern Arizona. Nor would it be the same in anywhere I traveled around the world, in Laos, in Vietnam, in Colombia, Ecuador, Panama. They would not be the same. Not at all. Not even close, right? So how can an organization, a company, create a microorganism that is going to function in one ecosystem as well as another ecosystem that is completely different? Now, this kind of comes down to their philosophy of terminator genes, right? This idea that they can, no matter what, just create life that basically will kill all other life. And there are some really smart people out there. George Monbiot is one in his book Regenesis. He actually talks about this idea of creating these biologicals to build soil. I completely 100% disagree. There is absolutely no reason why we cannot create healthy soils by mimicking the natural environments for where we live. And the absolute best way that we can do this is making plant-based compost with the natural flora that's living in our environments. So if we were to say, okay, so I have all of these clovers and wild and couch grass and all of these, what people would call weeds, growing in my gardens, growing in the wild edges. If we were to cut that, which we do, if we were to cut that, either with a weed eater or a lawnmower or with some scissors, some lawn scissors, and we were to compost that, then every single one of the nutrients that every single one of those floral beings needs would be in that compost, right? So if you are growing vegetables in that soil, here's the aha moment. If you're growing vegetables in the soil where those microorganisms live, where that wild flora to where you live wants to grow, and you make compost with that wild flora that you then feed your plants, guess what? They're going to do that much better than if you were to bring in outside compost. If you were to bring in compost from 200 miles away, if you were to bring in compost from a composting company, right? That will help. It always will help to kind of spur the soil. But it's when you start making the compost, and we really saw this over the last couple of years when we put our own compost made with that native flora on our cucurbits, on so all of our cucumbers, our zucchini, our winter squashes. We were even putting it now in our greenhouse beds. The amount of life that is in that compost based on the compost materials of your specific region is so much higher than anything else that you can create. So there's absolutely no reason why we would need organizations, companies, big ag, big pharma to go ahead and make these weird soil genetically modified biologicals that really what they're going to do is they're going to displace the microorganisms that are in our soil. For sure, they're going to try to do it so that the soils heat faster, the microorganisms start working faster in the spring, maybe even work longer in the fall, but that is not the natural cycle of things. No matter where we live, we try to extend the season as much as we can with, say, row covers or whatnot. But what we don't want to do is change the soil microbiology so that beings can't go dormant. We want those microorganisms to shift and change. Does that make sense? So this is such a huge part of what we do. So when we are at the end of the season, right, it is pretty typical for a lot of growers, especially big growers, to till up all of the old plant material, because agronomes, they tell us that if we don't, we're going to have the same diseases, we're going to have more pest problems, we're going to have more insect pressures. That is also just flat out not true. Myth busting keeps busting out. It is just absolutely not true. But these big farms will till up the ground, and then they'll seed it with a cover crop. Okay, the cover crop idea is great; it's fine. But why not just let? So if you're growing, say, a patch of broccoli or cauliflower, why not just let those plants die right in the beds? When the winds come, when the rains come, when the snows come, wherever you live, when everything dries out, why not just let whatever part you don't eat, or maybe it didn't form, just let it compost right there. Deal with it in the spring when everything is active, when you take it out, the amount of food that the microorganisms have access to is a lot more, because guess what? Now there's also native flora roots that are starting to grow. Right now, they're not going to grow as vibrantly. So what they're feeding on is what you have planted. This is just a way. And if you were really smart about it, all of your brassicas, you could have undersowed it with a type of clover, with, say, a crimson clover or even some sort of a white clover. And if you do that, then the microorganisms even have more to feed on. Because it's not just the other kind of soil bringing in. It's not other type of microorganisms that they need. They need to pull those root hairs out. They need to pull those other nutrients from that plant, divert them to whatever they're going to use them for. And we don't know this. Each situation is different. This is really the key to it all. Each situation is different. So wherever we live, whatever we grew, let it die, let it rot right in the beds. If you have open ground, by all means, seed it with some sort of a cover crop. Put in a winter rye if you have access to maybe a rototiller or a tractor, because it can be very difficult to turn up for the following year. But buckwheat or oats are very easy. They die off. Clover is another one. And the great thing about all of these crops is then in the spring, when everything dies back, you can just go ahead and rake it up. Put it into a pile, and then you can use it as mulch for all of your plants that you wish to have mulch, right? So coming back down to the final point, only nature knows the idiosyncrasies and the balance needed for ecosystems to thrive. Modeling and human science only scratches the surface, and I'm sorry, we will never, ever get there. And if you think I'm wrong, look at big pharma. Look at what look at big ag, which is basically big pharma. Look at what they've done. They believe that they can cure either invasive weeds or native flora by creating herbicide-resistant corn and soy. So what they did and what has happened is all of that herbicide that they sprayed on the corn and soy has now created super weeds that are now resistant, because plants want to grow. They're going to figure out a way. Their answer to that is to create a more powerful herbicide, which then goes into the waterways, goes into the living soil, then toxifies it. It's the reason why we're having trouble keeping all of our topsoil, keeping it healthy. It's because 97% of the planet's agricultural land is conventionally raised. But it's not just that, it's also the insecticides that they spray onto their crops. If you have an insecticide treated GM crop and you spray so that you get rid of the insect that is eating the crop, well, then that is also can create superbugs, and it's also going to have the residual damage of killing other insects. So this is what we know. This is what Big Pharma has done. So now to think about that they might be trying to manipulate the world's soils by creating a very minimal amount of microorganisms, even if they were to create 10 million. I mean, 10 million is like a teaspoon. And how do we even know, again, which microorganisms function in which season or function which with crop? Are they really doing the testing on 500 different varieties, 500 different cultivars, thousands of different varieties? Maybe each tomato variety wants something different. Maybe my Brandywine tomato wants something completely different than my super early Mountain Princess tomato. They're both heirloom, but maybe they want something completely, I don't know. That's not the point. The point is, or actually that is the point. The point is, I don't know, and no one will, and no one should try to. But the best thing that we can possibly do is we can make compost using our own soils or using all of our own ingredients as close to the farm as possible, because that is what our soils, what our living soils, what our microorganisms will know. So keep your grounds covered by letting all the plants just die right on the beds. Brings me up to a question. Is it too late? This is from Cody in Missouri. Is it too late to start compost for raised beds next year? No, absolutely not. If you are to take that green material from your edges, from your strips, take some brown material like dried leaves, dried straw, a little bit of living soil, put it in there as your activator, water it, cover it, then it really should be fine, really wherever you live. Of course, here in the north in Quebec, it is going to be a lot longer for everything to decompose. But there is still going to be some useful soil. And the great thing is about plant-based, 100% plant-based veganic soil or compost is, even if it's not 100% broken down, it can still be put into the raised beds. There is less fear of nitrogen lockup. And the reason why that is because the microorganisms are going to move that nitrogen to where it needs to go. Now, obviously, if you put just nothing but vegetable scraps into your garden beds that haven't even decomposed for a day, and you try to plant it, it's not going to work very well. But I want you to think about something called hugelkultur, right? This is the philosophy based on the gentleman from Austria, who wanted to grow citrus trees on his hillside on the side of the Alps. And his idea was to create these hugel mounds. I guess his name was Mr. Hugel. Anyway, I'll think of his name in a minute. And this hugelkultur creates like these mounds, but in the middle of these mounds are huge tree trunks and limbs and branches that haven't been broken down. Why? Because they're fungal. So then on top of that, you put compost, and on top of that, then you plant. And I remember making these in Panama. I thought it was nutty, but I thought, hey, I'd never done one before. Thank you. His name is Sepp Holzer. There you go. So Sepp and his hugelkultur method. So I tried this in Panama, and I just thought it was nutty because I had never seen where a tree broke down. Now, interestingly, when you're in the tropics and you're walking through those tropical forests, what you see is just that. You see all of these sort of decomposing trees and branches, and they're decomposing. I mean, there's fungus everywhere. And we even see this in the forest in Quebec, because here in Quebec in the summertime, we're very, very rainforest-like. You can go out in the forest, especially the last couple of weeks, just after the last rains, and it started warming up again, and the mushrooms were everywhere, and trees are just being taken over, rotted out by all of these mushrooms. Well, that's the idea, because in all of that all that mycorrhizae, they're going to move whatever nutrients. So there's too much nitrogen, the fungus is going to move it out. to what? Probably feed more fungus to create more mushrooms, because mushrooms can thrive off nitrogen. So what they're going to do is then they're going to give whatever plants. Now, it doesn't work for everything, but some things that it really worked well for that we planted that I thought was just shocking was winter squash, zucchini, and tomatoes. We just planted it right in the top. We just put the compost that we had available right over those logs, and we just planted. And it was incredible how fast winter squash grew. And anybody who's had a compost pile where they've thrown in some of their old winter squashes or maybe the seeds from the year before, winter squashes are one of the things that do most prolifically in a compost pile. We decided to do that experiment, which I just mentioned maybe about 5-10 minutes ago, with winter squash last year. That it was Yves Gagnon who said that you could use new compost. Now, his version of new compost and my version of new compost might have been 100% different, because my new compost was about 3.5 weeks or 4 weeks old. And I put that down, and my gosh, if I didn't have the greatest winter squash plants ever. So certain plants, certain crops don't mind. So is it too late to start compost for raised beds for next year? Absolutely not. Make your compost. Always be making your compost as often as possible, as many piles as you have space for, and use it. Even use it fast. That's the other interesting thing that we've noticed from all of our research and study here at La Ferme de l'Aube, is that the more plant-based material that we've had in our beds that's been uncomposted or 100% decomposed, the more that creates more food for year after year after year. So even though 3 years later, some of our beds, my gosh, you don't even see where we add chip branch wood or where there was all that like decomposed plant material, but maybe the next year you will. It's quite forest-like. It's quite forest humus-like. But plants will thrive. Now, this might be also very specific to what I mentioned before, in that it's possible that our soils understand that way of building soil, because this is what the natural realm of things, the ecosystem around us, does. In the wild grasslands, in the forest edge, in the forest, this is how it interacts. Now, if you live in Arizona, or you live in the desert Southwest, maybe what it will know better is some sort of dried grasses or green grasses. Because in Arizona time, in the winter, after the winter rains, there will be some green grass. Contrary to pictures that you see of the deserts, there'll be green grass. Hey, maybe you can even decompose cactus, planting that in a sepulchre hugelkultur bed, right? So I don't know. But what I do know is that when you use the materials that are closest to your place, they work better. All right. I think I've beat that one around enough. So let's continue. Number 2 discussion topic: letting all plants go to seed, fall over, and create brush piles is absolutely essential to building up the faunal community, the avian community, the insect community in your gardens. Migratory birds, the ones especially that we're starting to see in abundance now, all of the sparrows, we have about 5 or 6 different kinds, goldfinches, which will come and go. We'll start getting evening grosbeaks here, which are a threatened species here in Quebec. Migratory birds require seeds at appropriate times of year. Their journey is long and it can be difficult. And if they don't find appropriate food sources along the way, they'll die. They can't just decide all of a sudden to stop or not stop based on what's going on. They can fly maybe 20, 25 kilometers per hour, but when it's time for them to stop, when the year before they knew that, say, there was wild goldenrod going to seed right now, which is what's going to seed in the wilds right now, or there's wild clover going to seed right now. Well, if they come and that's not there, they're in trouble. They don't know what to do after that. They're going to go, okay, wow, I'm going to have to fly again. But they're flying on low reserves, right? Where the winters are long and food sources become scarce, these cultivated plants can be their lifeblood. Think of sunflowers, millet, and buckwheat. These are all highly attractive late in the season, even when the frost will come upon us, and it might come upon us today. And those grains of tournesol, those grains of sunflower, have kind of frozen a little bit. The birds are still in there picking them away. We have tons of sunflowers. We only are able to harvest just a few before the freeze comes so that we have a nice seed bank. But then after that, they just all stay there. And whether they're green or completely dry, the chickadees are in there, the goldfinches are in there, the blue jays are in there, the sparrows are in there, and the millet. Oh my gosh, we had just the most beautiful crop of Japanese millet this year, which isn't even really their preferred. But Melanie had to go out and cut some a little bit not 100% ripe, because they are just eating it like corn on the cob. I mean, they're just like they're just eating it all away. And it's because this time of year, they are very hungry. They're going to migrate off. Now, a lot of these sparrows, they don't go far. They might go from here down to the Riviera Outaouais or the Ottawa River, and they might stay there. That might be as far as they're going to go. But it's long enough. Little bird bodies are not, they're not very heavy. What are they? Maybe 15, 20 grams. And they eat their weight every day in food. So if you have an opportunity to create seeds, the other things they really like are lettuce seeds, rapini seeds, any kind of brassicas going to seed, carrots going to seed. They love those. So whatever you can leave, it's just going to help the flora along the way and the avian community along the way. The fauna along the way and the avian community along the way. And how does this benefit us? Well, what we know about what I have discerned this year about migratory routes and migratory presences is that it's not just the seed eaters that fly with the seed eaters. It's the seed eaters that fly with the worm eaters. And you'll see the worm eaters in the trees. So these are things like, these are creatures like your warblers or your vireos. They're up in the trees and they're just eating like crazy. Or the phoebes or the flycatchers, they're going to be in there eating all the flies that are around, right? So how does this all benefit? Well, it's all part of the biodiversity of your region. I don't know how it 100% does, but we do know that if they do eat seeds, especially of wild plants, and they go a little further off, they will be actually the ones to create more patches, because not all the seed is digested. It'll end up undigested in their poop, and in their poop, that'll create another patch. It's how we got cattails in our pond. I had no idea how it got there, but all of a sudden they were there. The closest they are away from here is 100 meters. So how do they get there? Well, somebody brought the seed that creates the cattail, because it's not the root system traveling that far. There's not enough water. So it must have been their seed pod, whatever that looks like. So this is all really, really cool stuff. All right, so when those plants fall over and the roots are still holding in, they're keeping the soil in place, right? So not only when it rains hard or snows hard, or we have that sort of snow and then rain, the soil won't move off. Now, if you create your gardens consciously and intelligently, then even if the soil does move off, it'll collect in green strips or in forest edges or some sort of edge. So even if you lose a little bit of compost, you lose a little bit of soil out of your, say, plot or bed or whatever you're using, well, then it will then put nutrient into a place that you can either use as compost by cutting it or leave it to go, and the floral community, the faunal community can use it. When the plants die, it will create hiding spaces for animals that hibernate underneath, especially, say, American toads. And we have pickerel frogs that live in they're kind of like a marsh frog. Is that how you say? I think that's how you say frog. Grenouille d'Americache. Anyway, a pickerel frog is a leopard frog. Sorry, same kind of thing, same kind of being. They're all spotted and they're really cool looking. Anyway, pickerel frogs tap into like our environment more than leopard frogs do, but they're going to look for places to hibernate. They're going to choose places that have lots of cover, lots of green cover, or in your garden beds, lots of cover crops or the plants that have fallen over. Also, ground beetles, the ones that actually make it through the winter time, they're going to hibernate underneath, but they need a place to do so. Otherwise, then if they don't, then you're going to have to actually wait for some of them to sort of walk in or migrate in from the wildlands. And that may or may not happen. It just depends. And what do they do for us? Well, they do a bunch. They're the decomposers also. They're the bigger decomposers. And ground beetles, they'll go ahead and eat some of the insects that like to eat our crops. So it's not about what they do for us. Again, it's what they do for themselves, what they do for the whole community. And they'll help us out as they see fit, but they end up helping us out. But you need to help them too by giving them a place to live. And small rodents, things like little beings like moles and voles and shrews and the jumping mice and the field mice. They are going to shred a lot of that sort of material. What we notice is that in the places that we put cover crop undersowed underneath our brassicas, they will shred the stems at the end of the year of the broccoli and the cauliflower. And then they'll make their nests underneath those mats of clover that have fallen down, that have gotten dry. So this is really cool. And you want these beings in there. Yes, of course, they're going to eat a little bit of our stuff. They're going to eat some of our transplants. But in the end, they create airflow. They create more places for other beings to travel through. Maybe they're like little industrial engineers. Maybe they're like little soil movers themselves, right? Like ants. They create an underground community. Anyway, continuing on. Some adhere to the policy, and you'll hear this a lot, of chop and drop, right? So you'll chop it, you'll move it, you'll drop it. Well, nature doesn't theoretically chop and drop. It drops, doesn't theoretically chop anything. If a branch falls, I guess you could call that chopping. When leaves fall, they fall. They just drop. They don't chop. They're not chopped up. They're not shredded. Why go through the extra effort of chopping and dropping when the beds can just be dropped? Something to consider. Takes out a step. I know you'll hear about this a lot, chop and drop. It's not something that we do. We have done it. And it's extra work when in the end, you don't really need to do it. And I don't really know if it gives any extra benefit. The only time chop and drop is really interesting is if you want to do a mulch over something. So if you chop, say we have an alfalfa patch and I'm going to go out here after this show and I'm going to cut some down. I'm going to ball it up and I'm going to wait about 3 or 4 weeks. And after we plant our garlic, I'm going to cover the garlic beds with that. So it's not really chop and drop. It's more like chop and mulch. But it's not really necessary. Think about it. All right, continuing on. Letting the plants go dormant on the beds creates a lasagna-type compost system. The elements make the plants fall. They cover the soil. The small moles, mice, and voles will create burrows, keeping up soil, and that covers parts of the plants. Now there are microorganisms above the plants and below the plants. It's kind of like the idea of when we make a compost system. We use a layering system where you have dry, green, a little soil, dry, green, a little soil, dry, green, a little soil. And that allows the opportunity for microorganisms to work up and down through the pile. They're going to be, guess what? Different microorganisms depending on where they are in the pile. It only makes sense. Those that are closer to the sun, closer to the light, are going to be a different microorganisms than the ones that are more in the dark. It just makes sense, right? You hear this big pharma? I don't think you're going to get it right because it's just not how you know how to make it function. But if we go ahead and just let all of our plants fall, then the action of composting, the microorganisms working as they wish to do, sort of mimicking nature in its best possible way, will then create the soils that we're looking for. If you go into a forest again, or if you go into a grassland, you dig down a little bit, you get kind of underneath the root systems of some things. Or in the forest, let's say you pull back the leaf litter, pull back the branches, you dig down a little bit, and what do you have? You have this kind of spongy humus, kind of mycorrhizal rich. You might even see the white filaments in there, but you don't see leaves anymore. You don't see twigs anymore. right? Well, the same thing is going to happen in our beds if we use our plants. If the soil lies barren, they will all move on. All of the microorganisms will move on, except the ones that will want to be there, but it may not all be everything that our gardening plant community would want. If they feel and if you let all the plants go, then certain beings that were living there, like the shrews and the moles, they're going to move on also because they're going to feel like they're more susceptible to predation, right? There you go. Again, it's something to think about. I'm not an expert in all this. All I have is 25 years of knowledge and understanding and working with my hands in the dirt every single year. So all I can tell you is what I've seen and focus on. Now, in the last 7 years, I've actually spent a lot more time trying to understand it more than I ever have before. And all of it makes sense, but only if we look at nature as we look at our gardens. And then it creates a nice, what's that? Circle. There you go. All right, moving on, gleaning the harvest. So the best way to look at our garden, especially at this time of the year with maybe the freeze coming in, is that we want to inventory our gardens. What must come out before first frost, or 0 Celsius, 32 Fahrenheit? Number one. Number two, what must come out before first hard frost, which is about -3 Celsius or 28 Fahrenheit? What can stay in throughout the entire winter? Keep in mind always, with the shortening days, longer, colder nights, plant growth will become more and more stagnant. Even if you want to have sort of a winter planting of, say, spinach or mesclun greens or kale, it's just not going to grow as fast. Even if it's in a greenhouse setting, the nights are just getting too cold for too long. The amount of daylight is really short. But the closer you are to the equator, it's a completely different story, right? In the wintering times and the summering times at the equator, whatever season that is, you can always be planting something. Lucky you. You also have a lot more wild native flora to compete with. Unlucky you. All right, continue on. So before first frost, all tender annual plants. Now, let's talk about tomatoes. Now is the time to think about, should we pull all of our green tomatoes out? Is it better to harvest green and ripen inside, or cover and let ripen a little? I have always gleaned the last of the green tomatoes and brought them inside, or put them into a place that's about 16 Celsius, about 60 Fahrenheit, and let them ripen off. Because I'm like, oh, well, they're green tomatoes. They're going fine. You know what? They don't ever really taste all that great. Even if you make a sauce, I always find that when they finally color, they have a very tart flavor. Now, they're pretty good for a tart salsa. If you want to make sort of a tart confiture, a tart preserves, it works. But I can't say that they're my favorite. What's better is if you have the opportunity, like, great example, tonight it's supposed to get down to freezing, but then after that, it's done. So we could put our floating row covers over the tomato plants, and you really should have one, at least one, floating row cover over our tomato plants, and hope that it doesn't get down to, say, -3 or -4 Celsius. If it doesn't, then you can let your tomatoes ripen just to that point where the blossom end is going to be colored. If you wait, and if you only harvest those, the ones where the blossom end is covered, then the flavor will be superior to anything that you will harvest green. This is actually the first year that I've decided not to harvest any green tomatoes at all. Just let it for the natural world to eat. Any mice that want to go in there, anybody who wants to go in there and eat those green tomatoes, they can. Microorganisms that will then end up breaking down those cherry tomatoes, so that next year when I go in there, where there's always some that have rotted or I didn't get to, they're just not there anymore. They've been all eaten away. So it's pretty neat. So anyway, this is what I do. Peppers is another interesting one. Is it better to harvest green or cover and wait until they have just a little bit of coloration to them? Same thing. If you harvest all your green bell peppers, there's a possibility that if you pick them just a little bit too green, they're going to be quite tart. They're not even going to be that juicy. They might even be a little bit dry. If they have just the slightest coloration on them, their flavor is enhanced so much more. This is something that we tried again this year. Usually, again, we harvest like bins of green bell peppers at the end of the year. Well, we've had freeze scares every couple of weeks. It hasn't happened yet, so we've just been letting it go. We've just been hoping it didn't freeze, hope it wouldn't freeze, and it didn't. So then every time it's supposed to freeze, we'll just go out and we'll harvest the ones that are maybe a quarter colored, quarter say red or half red. And whoa, the flavor is so much better. And if you're stuffing them, they're so much better. So anyway, wait, again, you can put a row cover over them and let them go ahead and ripen up even a little bit more. Some vegetables like summer squash, small is okay. Go ahead and take them out. Cuke, small is okay. Melons, if they're not 100% ripe on the vine, they're not going to be good. Even if you pull them, even if they think they're going to be, they're just not. So don't even bother unless, again, you cover. Another wonderful reason to have yourself at least one floating row cover to put over a couple things if you have to. Number 2, before first hard frost, -3 degrees. I like to take out all beets. This is when all cabbages should come out, broccoli, cauliflower, your large kale leaves, large salad greens, all of your radicchios. The reason why I would take out a lot of these vegetables this way, especially the kale and salad greens, is that the quality can really deteriorate. When it starts getting, I'll tell you in a minute, Trish. What was Jay talking about that should be covered or no point? Anyway, I was just talking about that if you're getting close to a freeze and you don't want to harvest your tomatoes green, go ahead and cover your tomatoes if you can. And then that way you can have your tomatoes ripen up a little bit on the vine, which is always a little better. Also, your peppers, if they're green, you can go ahead and ripen them. There you go, Trish. All right. Your large kale leaves. What I've noticed with kale here, and even though you can keep it out in the wintertime, what I find is that the quality, it gets quite, wife says coriace, so it really kind of rough. The leaves get rough. They're fine for stews, soups. If you really saute it, they're probably fine for kale chips. But if you want to chop it up fine, put it in a salad, ooh, man, they can get a little tough. But if you take it out before -3, if you take out a couple of nice bunches, you don't have to take it all because it's always fun to go out there in December underneath the snow and pick off some kale leaves. And you go ahead and bunch some and put it in your fridge. Well, then you're going to have some really nice, beautiful kale that you can eat for a good 3-4 weeks, because kale in that stage, especially picked when it's really cold in the morning, say 1 or 2 degrees in the morning, it's going to last in your fridge for a good 3 weeks. So always something to think about. First week of October, harvest 3 bunches of kale. You eat 1 a week. You're good all the way until the end of October. Pretty neat. Large salad greens is another one. Things like lettuces. Lettuces after -3, they're there, but depending on the humidity levels, depending on what happens, depending on how cold it gets after that, because it might just not be -3 and the next day be fine. It might be -3 and then one day it's a little warmer and the next day it's -2 again. Salad greens are going to start getting some sort of like bacterial spot, and their quality is not going to last. Even this time of year where we haven't had the freeze left, I'm lucky if I can keep my lettuce greens in the fridge for over a week. But if you've had pretty decent conditions with not a lot of rain, go ahead and cut your largest of your lettuce greens. And radicchios, if you're a fan of radicchio like we are, definitely want to come out before -3 degrees. All right, continuing on. Letting the rest through the winter time. In some climates and soils, especially those with more sand and clay, carrots, leeks, and parsnips can be left in the ground. This is pretty cool. So you don't have to actually have a root cellar or a cold room. You can go ahead and just keep your carrots and leeks in the ground. And it is true that what friend Rhonda said, I think it was last time, was that if you leave your carrots in the ground after a freeze, they actually become sweeter. And that is true. They can. It really depends on the intensity of the freeze, how long the freeze goes for the day. But if you live in a place and you have soils that are very sandy, you can leave them in the ground for quite a period of time through November. Just harvest them when you need. November, even December, it's possible. Now, if your soils are more clay like we have here, or more loamy like we have here also, then the nematodes, will start eating away. We have wild wire worms that will eat all three. And actually, we have huge trouble with leeks because as soon as the temperature changes, all sorts of insects decide to get in there. All sorts of nematodes start eating at the roots. And wintering leeks, we have a really tough time with. Catherine, can they be left in the ground too? Rutabaga after -3. Rutabaga really wants to have 2 hard freezes, right? So if the second freeze is -3, it's great. Can they be left in the ground too? If it's a sandy soil, sure, why not? They are such a tough winter vegetable, that root vegetable, that my guess is they can even sustain probably -5, -6, -7. It just depends on when, how long you really want to wait and how much storage capacity you have. I mean, rutabagas, we have rutabagas that are as big as my head. So we have a cold room, but if they were all going into my fridge, and I think we have about 15 or 20 down there, well, we would need a lot of space. It might take up our whole fridge. And I like rutabaga, but I don't like it that much. So I think you can try. I think you could go ahead and try and leave it out there as long as possible. Trish, is there any point starting or transplanting kale on West Coast? Can I take row care of carrots now? Why does squash, even delicata, grow poorly for me? It's not pollinator or water. Is there any point starting or transplanting kale on West Coast? Well, I guess I would say when. Yeah, I would transplant kale. My father, who lives in California, he goes ahead. Yeah, so there you go, Catherine. You don't have a lot of room for storage. Keep them out there as long as you can. It's only going to make them sweeter if they get even more than, they just say it needs 2 good freezes. But if they get 5 good freezes, it won't matter. Go ahead and leave them out there. If you have 20, you might start thinking about giving to the mater. Transplant this month of kale. You're going to have a tough time. It's not going to grow very well. I would wait until about January. But you should be able to put it out in January. Transplanting it now, again, the amount of light goes down. You're out there on Gabriola Island, Trish, so the amount of light goes down. No, I wouldn't even bother. You're just going to waste your time. Can I take row cover off carrots now? Yeah, take the row cover off your carrots. Why does squash, even delicata, grow poorly for me? It's not pollinator or water. Probably 2 things. Delicata is a very wants a lot of nutrients, and they want, like I was talking about earlier in the show, that wants a very new compost. It will do that much better. You could even use a mix of like 3-week-old vegetable scraps with some dry material and put that right where you're planting your delicatas. Think of your compost pile and how well winter squashes grow in there. The other thing is you really need to wait with winter squash until the nighttime temperatures are over at least 10 to 15 degrees, 10 to 12 degrees Celsius. They're just going to go and grow that much better. So I would try that. So don't plant your winter squash too early, especially for delicata. They're only about a 75 or 80 day variety. So you really don't need to get them in the ground. If anything, on Gabriola Island, I would probably wait until last week of May or first week of June. It should be just fine. Also, with winter squashes, go ahead and put the row cover on, because winter squashes, like all cucurbits, they love heat. So if it's not a water problem, keep the row covers on there as long as possible until the plants are large. Now, pollination could be a problem. It does depend, because pollinators, at least here, and now that I've noticed and talked to other people, pollinators will go into hibernation at a certain part during the summer, because they're creating their nests of babies, right? So they'll take all the early pollen, and then they'll go and they'll use that to feed their young, and then they'll come out. So they might be gone for about 3 weeks. Here, unfortunately, they're gone right when our winter and summer squashes first start flowering. So we actually have a little bit of trouble with our very first ones. After that, it's no problem at all. But wait a little longer and make sure you try to get yourself some new compost. Should be easy enough to do with vegetable scraps. They really, really will like it. So what about things like kale, spinach, lettuces can be left to harvest down to -5, -6. Like I said, they can get a little rough. Spinach, I don't know. What I've done and what I will do, and this year I won't even bother outside, I don't think. Kind of running out of time, and I planted a little bit heavier in the greenhouse, is that I would put a row cover on my nicest looking bed of greens, especially lettuces, until about mid to late November. And then I can keep harvesting it. It just depends on how much you want to try. It just depends on how much you want to work going later in the season. I know now we're getting awfully tired. I'm starting to get sore. I'm starting to ache. My body's starting to break down, and I need a break. So to concentrate it into one small area is great. All right, I'm going to answer, what does Trish have to say? I tried delicatas. I thought they'd have enough time, as the other didn't have enough time. So sad about kale. It's been a drought year and little from the garden. I didn't realize pollinators go away. There you go. It is a little sad about kale, but it's just the way it is. The best thing to do with your kale is Trish, is to plant it about a month ago. And then you would have at least baby kale now. But depending, you could try seeding it now, right now, if it's staying relatively warm. There you could try. All right. I was a little late, so I'm going to run over a little bit. There was one other question came up this week, and this goes into my coming events of the next show. How do you grow good cauliflower? I'm going to give up. This comes from Eileen in California and Patty in New York. Yeah, don't give up. Don't give up on cauliflower. The thing I can say about cauliflower, especially in New York State, is plant it later in the season to get ready basically now. I have very little luck in the spring or in the midsummer with cauliflower. It's just because it is a very cool loving crop to create that nice, beautiful white curds. Oh, I harvested really beautiful ones. I hope you saw them on Facebook. They were just gorgeous this year. Again, not huge, but still really nice size, really awesome to bake or make cauliflower tacos, vegan tacos. Oh, wow. Those are just amazing stuff. I think that if you were to try it, so if you were to get it into the ground 2 months before now, so if you were to get it in the ground in late July, you would do a lot better. Everybody would do a lot better. Just make sure they get consistent water all the way through the season. If it rains a lot, you don't have to bother. If it doesn't, you really need to water every few days. So that brings up, that's all the questions I had this week. That brings up next month's show, which is October 24th, which is our last of season 2. Thank you all for being here as often as you can and watching it after the fact. Very, very cool. It's going to be all about the reflections on the season that was. And this is not just about me telling you what my reflections are. This is about you. This is about you. I want you to tell me through my Facebook, through this show. I want you to post what you want to talk about, what your reflections were. I want to discuss those with you. I want you to ask me questions as to how you can make your gardens better for 2024. Depending on your answers, we'll see if we'll be even renewed for season 3, but it seems quite likely that we will. But this show, as all these shows really are really all about you. They're about how to make you all better growers, how to make you all more connected to our natural world, right? Coming events to anybody who's close. Month of September, that's now, the 30th and October 1st. Montreal Vegan Fest and Veganic Growing Extravaganza. If you haven't seen the event that I put out on Facebook, this is going to be the event of all events of veganic growing in the entire eastern part of Canada. Up to this point, there is not a better one to be found anywhere. There's seeds. We will have our seed stock. We have garlic for eating, but also for planting. German red heirloom garlic, the best cultivar we have. We have certified veganic stickers, so you can show your support for certified veganic as we are trying to transition the world to 100% plant-based agriculture and end animal agriculture forever. There's going to be my book, The Veganic Grower's Handbook. If you haven't picked one up, you can pick it up there. Celtic Tomato, no, I'm not going to talk to you about the $350 grants here. But what I will do is, and Nick Grower at, oops, info@certifiedveganic.org. Go ahead and write there, and I will tell you all about it. Biggest growing extravaganza of the year there, my book, The Veganic Grower's Handbook, which I always have a copy with because I just love holding it. It just makes me so happy. No, Celtic Tomato, it's not just for Canada. It's for Canada, the United States, and Mexico. You have to be, as part of Certified Veganic, which our mission is to certify farmers in those 3 countries and all of North America. So if you are a certified veganic grower, you would become a certified veganic grower. You can apply for our grants. All the information is on our website. So I hope that makes sense. I don't know where you're from, Celtic Tomato, but I would assume that would be Ireland, maybe. So if it is Ireland, then no, unfortunately, we're not good for you. But check the Vegan Organic Network. I know they do subventions or burses also. So maybe they can help in some way. So that's September 30th, October 1st. We're going to be there from 10 to 6 both days. So what is that? 16 hours of veganic growing discussion. All your questions answered. Everything they can possibly want. Oh boy, I'm going to be in a bunch of coffee as much as possible. Oh no, Watson South is, yeah, you're good. So that's right. You're in Watson. No, you're all good. So if you want to contact me. info@certifiedveganic.org. November 10th, 12th. Yeah, lots of Canadians of Celtic origin descendants. That's it. Sorry about that. My bad. November 10th, 11th, 12th, the inaugural Veganic Summit hosted by the Veganic Agriculture Network, collaborated with and by Certified Veganic and the Vegan Organic Network. This is going to be the biggest veganic growing online conference, seminar, everything that you would want to know from a gardening standpoint, a homesteading standpoint, a farming standpoint, from the biggest experts from around the world. We're all getting together, giving interviews, doing live shows, doing live Q&As. It's going to be absolutely fascinating. Look at it on the Veganic Agriculture Network or the Learn Veganic site. You'll be able to find information about the inaugural Veganic Summit soon. Super interesting, super cool. If you can afford it, think about signing up for an all-access pass, which will actually give you free tidbits, all sorts of free information, free access to other just special live shows. It's going to be very, very neat. Mark your calendar, November 10th, 11th, 12th, Worldwide Veganic Summit. That's it. That's all I have. Thank you for working with me with my technical difficulties. Looks like everything's fine now. So I wish you a wonderful month, a happy, happy autumn to you all, for all beings that we share this wonderful Eden, this wonderful planet, this wonderful place we call Earth together. I wish you a wonderful time until October 24th when we see each other again, or even better, see some of you this coming weekend at the Montreal Vegan Fest. Peace, and I'll see you soon. Thank you again, as always.